Welcome to INDG News. I'm your host, David, and today we'll be joined by our guest, Thorm. Hi, David. Thank you for inviting me onto the show today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Thorm Payson, an Indigenous rights educator and activist. I was invited onto the show today to talk to you about the treaties from my home area, Niagara Falls. Thank you for joining us, Thorm. We have a few questions to ask you about the area of Niagara Falls. The first question being, can you tell us about the treaty from your area? Why, yes, of course. As I mentioned earlier, I'm from the area of Niagara Falls, Ontario, a moderately sized border town with a large tourist population and a quaint Indigenous presence. This area is a part of two treaties, the primary treaty being Treaty 381, or better known as the Niagara Purchase, which was signed on May 9, 1781. This treaty covers a stretch of land 4 miles long and encompasses 3 cities. The second treaty is Treaty 3, better known as the Between the Lakes Purchase, signed in 1784. These treaties were signed during the era of Long Assault, which is a period of time during which the Canadian government was assimilating Indigenous peoples. Interesting that your small city is a part of 2 separate treaties. Now that we know about the treaties of your area, would you mind telling us about the Indigenous presence from your area? The presence of the Indigenous community in my area is quite small. A lot of the Indigenous peoples had left due to the modernization and the growing tourism industry of the area. The lack of presence from the community has left the area with only one Native Center, which was opened in 1972. A second Native Center was opened in 1984 in the neighboring city of Fort Erie. This being because all the Indigenous people who used to live in Niagara Falls had moved to the quieter town of Fort Erie. It's interesting how the Indigenous community in your area has moved to a nearby city due to the social changes of that area. Yes, historically the area is predominantly made up of Indigenous peoples of Iroquois descent, with a large majority of those peoples either moving to Fort Erie or living on the Six Nations Reserve just outside of Hamilton. That's a good little piece of history about the area. Now may you explain to me how the impact of these treaties has affected the assumptions, attitudes, and beliefs of the people regarding the Indigenous community in your region? I believe that the everyday person believes us to be a group of peoples who are undeserving of the land that they live upon. What a lot of people in Niagara Falls don't know is that the area that their houses and supermarkets are built upon are actually Indigenous land. Our peoples have lived off that land for thousands of years and have gone as far to fight in conflicts alongside fellow Canadians to protect that land. And in return, we have been shunned and have had to leave because of the way that society is moving, leaving us behind without consulting us on how we all should move forward. Even through all of this, we as a people have a positive attitude and are trying to educate the people of the area, be it through schools, going into the classrooms and informing the students on the history and the culture of our people and the lands that we once owned, to hosting community events in our native centers. Our values are still the same, and we're moving forward as a culture to help Canadians learn about our people. It's refreshing to hear that the Indigenous peoples of your area are working to educate the population on Indigenous issues. Now, before we finish, do you have anything to say on the legacy this history has of your area, as well as what the viewers should do with the new knowledge that they have gained? Well, I would just like to say that through the era of the Long Assault, we as a people are now in a stage of healing. Through use of the medicine wheel, we are emotionally and spiritually come to grips with the issues we have faced and our ancestors have faced in living on these lands. The legacy that we have left behind us is one of a strong people and a welcoming presence through our community. I hope that through the information you have learned today, you will be able to go out and educate fellow members on your community on the history of the area and those who have walked on the land before you. Well said. Thank you all for joining us on INDG News, and thank you to Thorm for joining us tonight on the show.